Guys, welcome back to another video. My name's Mark. I'm an entrepreneur and property investor. Myself, I've got 13 properties worth about £3.5 million at this point. And on top of that, I've started and scaled businesses into the many millions. So I've got a broad range of experience when it comes to growing investment property portfolios as well as businesses. And I think it's that experience that qualifies me to give some perspective when it comes to maybe more commercial arrangements such as no money down deals. So in this video, I'm going to go through a little bit about how I perceive no money down deals in the property industry. But before we get into it, if you could possibly give it a big like, it helps me out with the YouTube algorithm and I would massively appreciate that. And if you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing. At the end of the day, we're going to be giving away an investment property on this channel, so there's no good reason not to subscribe. On top of that, we're doing the monthly subscriber giveaway, which means that every month we're going to be doing the dividends out of our subscriber portfolio and giving it to our subscribers. So there's cash to giveaways every month anyway, as well as all the knowledge that hopefully I'm imparting on you. Anyway, let's get into the video. Let's talk no money down and how I see it. So when we talk about no money down, for me, I see that really as a way of not using our own money, because normally money is going to need to exchange hands at some point in time, right? It is a product, there's going to be costs, but I really think what people mean when they say no money down, they mean not using their own money or not leaving any of their money in a deal. Now, if we talk about, first of all, the easiest way and more traditional way of not using any of your own money, I guess that would be using the bank's money. So this is through things like refinancing. So you might buy a property, raise further finance on it, but through a mortgage, and then use that money to purchase another property. So if I look at my first and second property, when I bought my second house, it was a no money down deal for me, really. At the end of the day, I took a refinance on my first house. I used that as a deposit for the second house. None of my earned money went into that. However, it was my money. It was equity within the first house. So it's not traditionally no money down, but it's not using any of my own money. And I think that's really what people are looking for. Most people understand that money is going to transfer hands at some point if you're buying a house. That is going to happen. It is a fact. So the first one would be to use bank's money. And there are other ways that you can use bank's money, right? You can raise finance against many of your other assets. So don't just think about mortgages, think about other things. I know a friend of mine who's recently got a supercar. He bought it in cash, and that's a £150,000 asset just sat there depreciating it. Well, recently he's refinanced that supercar. He's then going to use the money that he had put down on that car to then use that as a deposit on a new property. And it makes perfect sense. To be honest, he should have bought it in that way in the first place. But people don't know what they don't know. And ultimately, he's now making the right move, I would think, buying an appreciating asset to pay for the liability. Second thing I've got on here is using family and friends. And maybe you're fortunate enough to be moving in a circle of family and friends who have a lot of money and can maybe lend you large amounts of money. Myself, I've been fortunate enough to be around family who can maybe lend me £5,000, £10,000 when I've maybe got to the end of a renovation and I've needed a bit of extra funds. In terms of friendship groups, again, probably £5,000, £10,000. We lend each other as and when quite freely if we need that sort of stuff. But we're not fortunate enough to be able to borrow £200,000, £500,000, or any sort of significant, use that as a deposit or buy a house for cash outright. So for me and my circumstances, I've been able to leverage family and friends on occasions, and I've also been leveraged multiple times. I've lent people £10,000 here, £10,000 there, and had it back within 3 months. So I think family and friends and being in the right circle, very, very useful. And you know, it can be applied to pretty much any level of spectrum of earning, but it does imply and require a level of trust. So I think family and friends, useful, but make sure that you're on the right track and that you're doing the things that will allow that trust to be given. I've certainly got friends and people that I know that I wouldn't lend £10,000 to. At the same time, I've got family and friends that I'm quite happy to lend £10,000 to with nothing more than a verbal text message or something saying, can I borrow 10 grand for 3 months? It wouldn't be a problem at all. So I think it's really important that you're viewed in the right way amongst your family and friends. Third one on my list is investors. And where can you find these investors? I mean, social media is fantastic. Myself and my company, we work with a lot of investors, both that we found on social media and through my YouTube channel and other avenues, but also people that are friends and family and have seen what we're doing and I'm doing and gone, oh, can I have a piece of that? How do I get involved? So investors are a really good way of being able to leverage other people's money in order for you to purchase property. Now, what we're talking about in this one is fixed term investments. So this might be where you have an investor, they don't want to become a property developer or a property investor, but they're quite happy to lend you £50,000 for a 10% return over 1 year. So you might be able to borrow that at that level and then pay that person back. You could also have fixed term interest rates with family and friends. There's nothing to stop you doing that. But in my world, we just kind of lend each other as and when we need, small amounts or smallish amounts. And I get that 10 grand isn't a small amount, but smallish amounts in relative to our wealth. 4, I've got investors in joint ventures. So this is the other thing about investors. Doing JVs, maybe setting up a company together where you find the property, you've got this really amazing deal, the investor can finance it and pay for the deal, and on the balance sheet of that company, the investor will always be owed the money. And maybe you set it up as a 50-50 shareholding, but on the balance sheet of that company, the investor who put the money in will have that debt paid before you start splitting any other profits. So I would always suggest that if you're going to do a JV, that can be limitless in the way that it looks. So you probably want to get some good advice from a solicitor, an accountant, get a good idea of what is and isn't possible, and make sure that whoever you're going into business with on a JV basis has a good financial history, because you are going to tie yourself to that partner in this company. So I would always make sure that you're ultra careful when using JVs and tying yourself to somebody else who you may not know that well. It's ultra important that your interests are completely aligned. You know, when are we going to exit this? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? Is it 12 months? What is the exit strategy? Am I buying you out? Are you buying me out? Are we selling the property? All of these things need to be discussed before you go out and do these sort of deals, because I've seen it go so wrong on so many occasions where people's interests are just not aligned. And it normally ends up in a court. It normally ends up screwing both parties over. Investors, let's make sure your interests are completely aligned, because if they're not, this sort of stuff can just fall apart. The last two I have on here are very similar. So that's vendor finance and lease option agreements. So vendor finance essentially applies when you're purchasing a property that maybe is completely owned by someone, and you ask the vendor to provide you a mortgage and you repay them on a monthly basis to pay off the money that you owe them. Now that can be arranged with a solicitor, it can be arranged with anyone. It's not a traditional way of buying, as lease options agreements also aren't traditional ways of buying. Lease option agreements are used a lot in land purchases or development, because what you're looking to do is, I will buy this property on the basis that I get planning, or on the basis that I'm able to do the extension, or once I've uplifted the value. So a lease option agreement is traditionally used in those sort of senses. So let's say, for example, you have a garden centre, it's worth £1 million. Once it's developed, the end value will be about £4 million, and it's about £2 million worth of cost to do, and there's this £1 million of profit, but ultimately it all relies on you being able to get planning permission, otherwise it's worthless to you. You might pay a fee in order to secure a lease option agreement on it for 2 years whilst you go through the planning permission, and at the end of that you may pay the £1 million, or maybe you split the fees, or maybe you split the profits. Well, I don't know, it can be arranged however you want, but that's traditionally where lease option agreements are used. It would be very unusual for you to go into an estate agent and go, I'm looking for a property that I can buy on a lease option agreement. So I'll do another video in a bit more detail about lease option agreements and vendor finance, because they're, again, are very useful tools, but they're only used in very specific ways, in very specific circumstances. I would save the rest of this stuff on here, the bank's money, family and friends, investor finance, investor joint ventures. They're much more traditional. A lot of people in this industry are doing those sort of things. And I would say that the other two, far more niche and specific to certain circumstances. So I think I'll go through that in another video in far more detail. But let's just recap. And bank's money, that's probably the easiest thing to start with. You know, how can you borrow some money? What can you refinance? All those sort of questions. The next one will be family and friends, and looking at how you can leverage the relationships that you've got in place at the moment. Maybe they could even become investors on a fixed rate return, or maybe investors in a joint venture. I know lots of people who've done father and son combos where they're building a property business together, and the son's got lots of time and is able to go and find the properties. The father maybe bought a house, maybe the father's got lots of money due to just owning property for a long period of time, that's gone up in value. So those sort of things work really, really well, and interests can be completely aligned. So, but again, coming back to that point, make sure interests are aligned. So yeah, that would be my video on no money. I don't think it's really no money, I just think it's not your own money. I think that's what people are looking for. And my synopsis would be very, very possible. I think more than half of my properties, if not 3/4 of my properties, have been used with banks' money, friends and family borrowing small amounts to finish completions. I would say about 80% of my properties, if not 90%, have been used using banks' money, because ultimately I've always just been refinancing. About 10% of the funds, I guess, has come from recycling rents. And then friends and family, we've lent each other small amounts just to finish off renovations and stuff like that. But beyond that, I haven't really borrowed from investors on a fixed rate return. I've been offered it several times, but ultimately I've always been able to borrow at more attractive rates from the bank. And in investors JVs, I haven't really found an investor that I really want to partner up with and tie myself financially to a company with. So maybe that's just my experience, or maybe that's going to be a lot of people's experiences, I'm not sure. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've really enjoyed putting it together for you. I will see you again on Friday.